Today we are looking at a loudspeaker from one of the most storied companies in American hi-fi. The 4329P from JBL isn't only an active loudspeaker, but it's a streaming active loudspeaker. And that means we get aptX Bluetooth, Apple AirPlay 2, Tidal Connect, Spotify Connect, Google Chromecast and Roon readiness out of the box. In other words, it's a complete hi-fi system in a box to which we just need to add mains power. Now, providing performance context to the JBL in this video will be side-by-side comparisons with 3 other loudspeakers, and I'll be using music we'd read about in The Guardian, in The Wire and over at Pitchfork.
This episode is brought to you by Made by Music, the new podcast from Cambridge Audio.
Okay, so to explain what's going on inside the JBL 4329P, I'm going to start with some vinyl. And those 2 bits of vinyl are Talking Heads' Live at WCOZ and Global Communications Maiden Voyage 12-inch. Both of these releases came out on Record Store Day of this year. And I'm currently spinning these 2 records on a very fancy Thorens turntable whose cartridge talks to a PS Audio phono stage, and that phono stage is connected to the primary JBL loudspeaker's XLR inputs. So that's not an XLR input on the back of each speaker as we'd usually find with studio monitors of this type, but left and right XLR sockets on the back of one speaker, the primary speaker. And then that primary speaker hands off the audio signal to the secondary speaker via a digital interlink. And for that interlink, we have a choice of Ethernet cable for 24.192, or we could go wireless at 24.96. Now, I went with wireless because the supplied 3-meter Ethernet cable isn't long enough to properly separate the speakers without putting a drooped U-shaped cable between the speakers. I really think JBL should provide a longer cable out of the box. But vinyl purists should note here that their precious analog signal will be digitized upon entry to the JBL. Now, never mind that 95% or more of modern vinyl has already been through a DAC at the cutting phase. We should really acknowledge that the 4329P's drivers and those drivers' amplifiers will have a far greater impact on what we hear than any ADC chip. Talking of which, the 4329P is a 2-way design. That means we get 1 tweeter and 1 mid-bass driver. Now, the tweeter here is a horn-loaded 1-inch compression driver, so not a dome tweeter, and it is powered directly by a 50-watt amplifier. And the mid-bass driver is larger than that found on most of the streaming speakers previously covered on this channel. It's an 8-inch paper cone that sits within an aluminium cast frame and is powered directly by a 250 watt amp. Now, JBL confirmed to me that the 2 amps inside each speaker are what we call direct digital. So that means that the amplifier is digital all the way from the input to its switching output. And that also means there is no interceding DAC stage. And in recent years, we've seen this DAC-less direct digital approach to switching amplifier design pick up speed with outboard models from the likes of Technics, Bluesound, Lingdorf, Peachtree, and most recently Marantz. However, I think this is the first time I've seen direct digital amps used inside an active loudspeaker. Now, feeding the 4 direct digital amplifiers, so 2 per channel, is a DSP-based crossover, and feeding that crossover are the primary speaker's digital inputs. So we've got streaming, digitized analog, and hardwired digital. So exposing the JBL's would-be double life as a studio monitor, the XLR sockets are phono plug compatible. So you can use XLR connectors or phono connectors, but they're not really used very often in the hi-fi world. And the USB-B socket is probably really for studio desk hounds wanting a PC or Mac hookup, because I can't see anyone at home putting these JBLs on a desk, but I guess never say never. Now, nearby to that USB-B socket, we also find Toslink, but I cannot shake the feeling that HDMI ARC would have better satisfied home listeners, especially at the price of these loudspeakers. They sell for €4,000 a pair. But you know, coulda, woulda, shoulda. Anyway, the rather unusual looking JS80 stands will run you another €220 a pair, and according to JBL, these stands perform several roles. So they get the high frequency energy closer to ear height, so they put the tweeter at ear height. They get the low frequency energy away from the floor, which apparently, according to JBL, helps tighten up the bass response. But I think most importantly for JBL, these stands tilt the speaker upwards by 7 degrees for what they claim to be superior dispersion, especially at closer quarters, or you know, when you're sitting here and the distance to speakers isn't all that great. We'll just pause for a siren. Now, personally speaking, I don't love the skeletal look of the JS80 stands, and their lack of cable routing keeps the primary speaker's cable vomit on full display. And I think really that should be sorted on a €4,000 speaker. But hey, what do I know? I'm not a speaker designer, so go figure. On the other hand, I wouldn't want to forgo the 7-degree upward firing angle, because my listening chair, which is right here, is only 2 meters from the speaker plane. And if you want to bring your own stands, you can obviously, but know that each 4329P, God, that name is so catchy, isn't it? Each of those speakers weighs a substantial 16 kilograms. And in case you were curious, the 4329P sound more open and expansive to me on the JBL stands than on the slightly lower and non-rake stands that I use for the Zoo DWX. Now, while we're on the topic of aesthetically suspect accessories, can we talk about the 4329P's remote control? Because in the context of, I guess, what I would call the high quality fit and finish of this loudspeaker, this sort of plastic Bluetooth remote, it looks and it feels cheap. And I really think that JBL could do much better here, even if it meant lifting the price of the speakers by €100. That said, I still use that supplied remote more than the source selector and the volume controls on the front panel of the primary speaker, which I guess underscores my point of why remote controls are very, very, very important. And I gotta say, it's a much neglected area by streaming active loudspeaker designers. Now, in the wake of some recent videos, I've been asked if I've added a solid state drive to my Nucleus One Roon server. And the short answer is yes, it sits in the undercarriage. Now, the Nucleus One is the device that serves locally stored files and also tidal streams to Roon compatible streaming endpoints on my network. So that means all Roon ready devices like the JBL speakers, plus all Apple AirPlay devices, all Chromecast devices, all Sonos devices, and all Squeezebox devices. Now, I gotta say, no, the Nucleus One doesn't sound any different to the Roon Core running on a Mac or a PC, but I would say I think it's slightly faster in starting streams than the MacBook Air, the M1 MacBook Air, and the external hard drive that I was using previously. So maybe that's a solid state drive advantage. So anyway, thank you to Roon for sponsoring this video. Just a quick word about subwoofers here, because with a sub connected to the primary speaker's auto sensing socket, the signal going to the sub is low pass filtered at 80 Hz, and the signal going to the speakers is then high pass filtered at 80 Hz. Now, do the JBL need a subwoofer? Well, in my 6 meter by 5 meter room, definitely not. Would they benefit from a subwoofer? Probably. In fact, it's almost certainly they would, but they don't need one. That's the point. They don't need one. And with a pair of bass reflex ports firing forwards from behind the detachable grills, JBL says the 4329P are 6 dB down at Hertz. Now, I think that's impressively low for a cabinet of this size. And it reminds me of Kef's LS60 wireless that I now have sitting in Portugal, because it seems to me that modern day speaker designers can pull more from a certain cabinet volume when going active than going passive. Also, I think it's worth noting that before I started listening to these speakers in earnest, I had to drop the bass contour toggle switch to -3 dB, because the 0 dB position made the bass sound overcooked and bloated in my room. Maybe in your room it won't, but in my room it definitely does. And also, I built a playlist to test these JBLs, and it contains songs from Creedence Clearwater Revival, a little known electronic music outfit called Drum Computer, Talk Talk, the OJs, Beth Gibbons, who used to be in Portishead, Trick Finger, which is an alias of John Frusciante from the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and then REM, but REM before they got shit and went really MOR for 5 years, U2, and then a dub outfit who've done a tribute to the Police called Dub Xan, and then lastly, Richard Thompson. So pulling up the Trick Finger cut, it doesn't take long to realise that the JBL's strongest suit is dynamics, and I mean dynamics top to bottom. And this means they put plenty of daylight between the quiet and loud sounds as they shove sound forward into the room. Now, those dynamics aren't quite as robust as the Zoo DWX, and they aren't quite as mid-range centric as we hear from those Zoo. And REM's acoustic Half a World Away still, to me, sounds more arresting through those Zoo loudspeakers. Now, regular viewers will know that the DWX is a passive loudspeaker that requires an outboard amplifier and streamer. And in this case, I used the Marantz Model M1 because it too is a direct digital amplifier. And I've got a review coming on that very soon. Also noteworthy in this side-by-side comparison is how the JBL reach deeper into the sub bass on the Dub Xan track than the Zoo. So sometimes I want to add a subwoofer to the Zoo and other times not. I'm kind of on the fence about it, but I never get that inclination with the JBL. Two other active loudspeaker models that go impressively low for their cabinet size and sit in the same price postcode as the JBL are Buchart's A500 and Genelec's 8341. And as we know, the Buchardt gets its streaming signal over WiSA from the outboard Platin hub, but the Genelec, they don't do streaming at all. And the JBL go almost as low as the Buchardt stand mount, but are top to bottom more dynamically expressive than the Dane. And that's how I hear it from Talk Talk's Ascension Day. And it's that dynamic expression that makes the JBL more fun to listen to than the Genelec. The JBL add a layer of excitement to the transparency that we already get from the Genelec, and they do so whilst maintaining some of the Finn's understated composure when ploughing through more complex material like U2's The Fly. But to be fair to Genelec, they don't market the 8341 to the hi-fi crowd. It seems to be very much a studio targeted speaker. However, Buchardt do talk to the hi-fi crowd, and the A500 doesn't offer quite the overall clarity offered up by the JBL, and certainly not the Genelec. So playing the OJ's Backstabbers, yeah, I know, that's kind of unusual for me, isn't it, that kind of choice? From that track, we also hear how the JBL's top end is smoother and better extended than the Buchardt. But complex music like the U2 cut and the Talk Talk can sometimes make the JBL's lower treble sound a little strident when you really get to playing loud. And when I say loud, I mean over 85 dB in the seat. I also prefer the JBL's mid-range to the Buchardt's because it lets us see further into Richard Thompson's mix, especially in the phantom center that's drawn between the loudspeakers. That said, the JBL doesn't have the Buchardt's master tunings or the Platin Hub's room correction. So bass contour settings aside, we only get one voice from the JBL. But I gotta say, what a voice. I think this speaker sounds utterly superb, especially in this room. I really do think that the larger sort of stand mount loudspeaker is the best fit for this room. A smaller two-way, putting aside the Buchardt A500, a smaller two-way can sound a bit weak and tepid in this room, and then a big floor stander tends to give me too much bass energy, but a large stand mount like the JBL, like the Zoo, seem to really hit the sweet spot. Now I say all of this because how a loudspeaker interfaces with your room is crucial to the sound that you'll get. And I think the JBL sounds so good that I'm prepared to overlook the stand's rather unfavorable aesthetics, and the remote actually. And I particularly enjoy being able to connect a phono stage to the back of one speaker instead of the two demanded by the Buchardt and the Genelec. So if you like the dynamics and the form factor of the Zoo DWX, but want a less mid-range centric sound for which you don't have to do the which amplifier, which DAC, which streamer dance, then the 4329P could be for you. Anyway, if you like this video, you know what to do, and please consider subscribing to the channel if you dig what I do in general. And as always, Patreon is there for anyone wanting to buy me a cup of coffee or two as a way of saying thanks for this video. Oh, and please drop the LS60 are in Portugal in the comments to let us know that you stuck it out to the bitter end. Anyway, thanks ever so much for watching.